This is going to be the green drake. It's a great dry fly pattern, especially when the greens are coming off. I don't know that there's anything special about the way that I tied this particular pattern, but hopefully you can learn a couple of tips along the way here that have at least helped me with what can sometimes be a complicated pattern. It's not overly complicated, but it can be a little bit complicated. I've got a size 12 hook here in my vise and using some olive sheer 14-aught thread. And this is, I like to tie this up as a parachute pattern. It just helps me see it on the water a little bit better, which means we're going to have to add a parachute, which adds a little bit of complexity to the pattern. I'm not using synthetic. I really like to use this calf rather than calf tail. This is calf body fur. Cut out a clump, messier than I'll get out. I'm going to just kind of hold that over my garbage bin, and I'm just going to flip my fingers through it. And by flipping my fingers through it, or you could use a comb. I find this fur is fine enough that the comb is not necessary, but you can start to see that I've got a mess on my hook, but also that some of that body hair is starting to come away. Yet you can see how nice and aligned we are right now. Yeah, that's me being cynical. I'm just going to again grab this by the tips, flip my fingers through it just to get rid of any of the small hairs and any under hair. That'll help me stack it. I'm just going to take this hinged kind of stacker here. I find that this is really a useful stacker for this particular part of the pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just tips first, putting my calf body hair in here. After I've tapped a million times or so my stacker, you can see the ends of this calf body hair is now much better lined up than what it was before. So I'm going to kind of grab that. For measurement, I'm going to want this wing, this parachute wing, to be about the length of the shank of the hook here. So I'm just going to turn my thread counterclockwise. That's going to tighten, it's going to flatten it up. Also will cause this thread to jump back towards my fingers, which is what I want. And you'll note when I pull it tighter, I'm pulling up rather than down when I go a little bit tighter. And once I've got a couple of wraps on this, I'm going to go ahead and take some wraps backwards while keeping the butt ends firmly in my fingers here. And with those still in my fingers, I'm just going to come on in with my scissors. And by keeping those in my hand, I'm going to be able to make a nice clean cut there. So now that I've got those pretty much in place, I'm just going to take a few careful thread wraps backwards. And I am going to put some pressure on this so it'll get a little bit tighter as I move back. And then as I move back forward a little bit towards the front, one thing that I like to do, especially when I'm using a post, is I'm going to shore it up with a little bit of varnish or head cement. So I'll just keep a bottle handy and a sewing pin handy. And I'm just going to go ahead and dab some of that right on those thread wraps there. I find this works better than UV. It'll kind of soak in a little bit more. UV is not going to soak in. Once I've got that dab of head cement in place, I'm going to go ahead and take thread wraps through it as I move up towards the front of the hook here. Then I'll take my fingers and, like I always do, make a mess. I'm going to go ahead and advance my thread forwards, keeping it fairly tight as I go forward. And when I get to about where I want to stand this post up, we're going to just stop there. I'm going to grab all of those fibers, and then I'm going to take thread wraps right up against and under the base of that calf body hair. And by taking some jam wraps here right against the base, it's gonna help me have this stand up a little bit more, which you'll see now. We've got a little bit of a mess, but that's okay. Right here is a good time for you to wax your thread, because we're gonna mosey up the post here a little bit, and it'll just grip a little bit better if you're able to put a little bit of wax on your thread there. So I'm going to go ahead and take this wrap up over the top. Then I'm going to hold this bunch straight up and down as I take thread wraps without a lot of pressure, but I'm going to start at the base. And then I'm going to work my way kind of up. If you pull too hard on your thread here, it'll just come right off of the post that we're trying to build here. And this post is going to be used for our hackle when we finish this fly up. And the other nice thing about the post is that it's white, and I will be able to see it on the water much better. So I've got my post pretty much where I want it to be. We will come back to it at a point in time and add some additional wraps to it. But now I'm going to just work my way back down towards the shaft or the shank of the hook. Just like that. And once I get back down to the base, then I'm going to take a few thread wraps around the shank of the hook itself. So you can see we've sort of got ourselves started off really nicely here with our post in place. So we're pretty solid here. We've got our parachute up here. We've got a good post going. We're going to wrap our hackle around that. The post is going to allow me to, or the parachute's going to allow me to see this fly on the water much better. And traditionally, when you're tying a green drake, you're going to have a tail made out of usually moose mane. I'm actually going to cheat here a little bit, and I like to use a little bit of elk hair that's been dyed black. That's one of the characteristics of this pattern, is a very dark black tail. And I also want this tail to be pretty sparse. So I'm going to grab and make a cut of this elk hair here, and we're going to be getting rid of a lot of this. So I'm just going to pinch that firmly between my fingers here, and then I'm going to run my comb through it, and that will help us get some of that under fur out of the way. That under fur is what's going to keep this from stacking really nice, and I want this to stack really nice. So I want to get rid of that under fur. And I'm going to lose several fibers here as I'm combing this, which is perfectly fine, because I want, like I said before, you can see what I've got right at this point, and that's even way too much. I need maybe half of that, and I'll still be getting rid of some. So now we've got this kind of a thing going here. And just like our calf body hair, I'm going to go ahead and take this dyed elk hair, and I'm going to drop it right into our stacker here. So once I've got those fibers stacked, we're just going to open up our stacker and then grab hold of that just very sparse tail. I want this tail to be about a little bit longer than the shank of the hook. So that's going to be kind of my measure right there. We're going to go ahead and take a wrap or two, trying to keep those fibers on the top of the shank of the hook. I'm going to take a look at the measurement here, and that's looking fine to me. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take some tighter wraps, moving back towards where I want the abdomen on the pattern to start. And I am using some force as I'm pulling down on those fibers. And once I've got those fibers kind of in place, I'm just going to turn my vise a little bit sideways here, and we'll come in with our scissors make a couple clips. Reason 433 of why it's nice to have a rotating vise. Now I'm just going to go ahead and secure those butt ends down, and they should be going right up against where we tied in the calf body fur. So we're already building kind of some taper into this pattern. With that, I'm just going to go backwards again over this. I may turn my thread counterclockwise just to flatten it out a little bit as I move back to where I want my abdomen to start. Once I get back here, I am going to take one wrap underneath. Those fibers are already standing up pretty well, but by taking a wrap underneath, we're gonna help it stand up even more. For ribbing, I'm just going to use the slightest hint of a rib, and I'm just going to turn to some crystal flash or flashaboo here in a pearl, and I'm going to just tie this in, and I'm going to let it carry to the lens side of the hook, and then I'm just going to secure that back to where my abdomen is going to start. I like to have that on the lens side over here because it'll just not mess around with that tail nearly as much. With that secured in, we'll just go ahead and we'll clip out the balance and tidy things up, and we are ready to move on. So being a green drake, we're going to use a green dubbing. I'm just going to use Awesome Possum. It's much like rabbit fur. I'm going to go with the gold and olive for the abdomen here, which will give us a much lighter color. And then when we move on to the thorax, we'll darken it a little bit by going from that golden olive to just a regular olive. So once I've got that started, I'm just going to finger dub this right onto our thread, leaving a little bit of a gap right here, which will allow me to take a few thread wraps without dubbing on it back to where I want the abdomen to start, right about here. And then I'm going to want to make sure I get at least one good wrap of that dubbing, and then I'm just going to keep it tight, tightening it up as I move up, creating our thorax here. And I'll take some wraps back over itself because we do want that taper. We already have some natural taper going on because of the materials that we've used. We're just going to work our way up. So we've got ourselves a nice tight body going on. I'll do some trimming. The possum has guard hair just like rabbit, so you've got some of that sticking out there. But we're going to go ahead and take our ribbing material, our crystal flash, and just take fairly open wraps, moving up through that dubbing. And that's just going to really, again, just create kind of a hint of a rib. And it'll trap down some of the fibers from our Awesome Possum dubbing as well. I'm just going to take that right up to where my thread is located behind this post. And we're going to go ahead and take a wrap or two over the top of it to secure that in place. And then I'll just go ahead and turn my vise, and we'll go ahead and clip that off. So before we do our thorax, I've got a piece of grizzly hackle that's a green colored. I'm going to tie this in right at the base of the post there. And the trick is we're going to want some of that bare feather sticking up to tie up against the base of the post here. So I'm going to do what I always do, take those couple of first wraps just to secure my hackle in place. And then I'm going to kind of take a look at it and see how much length I have, because I want some bare stem. Because at this point we're going to now attach our hackle to our post. This hackle should not be attached to the shank of your hook. It should be attached to the post. So kind of work on the measurements there a little bit. And I'm going to kind of work my way up my post. And as I work my way up the post, what we're going to end up with is our hackle feather should be secured near the top of the post there. So now I'm going to start wrapping my way back down the post. Until we get back down to the shank of our hook. Once we get down there, I'm going to capture that stem. I'm going to go on the other side of the post, and as I start tying towards the eye of the hook, you'll notice that our stem is going to bend towards the eye, which is exactly what I want to have happen. And I can go ahead and turn this upside down and come in with my scissors and clip off the butt end of the stem of my hackle feather. Now my hackle feather is firmly attached to the post and not to the hook shank itself. So with all of that firmly in place, now I'm going to go ahead and grab some more Awesome Possum, but this time we're going to go with an olive rather than the golden olive. That's going to match our olive really nicely, or our golden olive. But it'll also be a bit darker, and that's what we want. We're going to be covering up thread wraps with this dubbing, and we're going to be creating a thicker thorax. And I'm just finger dubbing this right onto the thread here. So with that dubbed on, I'm going to just keep tightening it and take several wraps behind our post just to build up some thickness, because we do want that thorax to be a little bit thicker. And then I'm going to cross over, and then I'm going to take a few wraps in front of my post as well. And these wraps are going to create some of that bulk that we want for our thorax, but it's also covering up some of those thread wraps, and that's what we want to do. I'm going to kind of hold all that stuff out of the way a little bit as we build up this thorax on this back side, or on the front side I should say. So now we've got more that nice pronounced thorax going on, getting down to our thread. And I'm going to just stroke some of this back. I'll probably clean some of it up with my scissors like I always do. I'm going to start building up a little bit of a head here with our thread, but not much of one, really just a hint of one. So we're just going to go ahead at this point, grab our whip finisher. I'll take a couple of wraps right behind the eye, but most of the wraps I want to start moving towards the back so that we have a taper from the back towards the front on this head here. So once I have that all taken care of, I'll go ahead and tighten up my thread, and we're going to go ahead and detach our thread at this point. So here's where we break all of the rules that I used to think existed in tying flies. We've cut our thread off, first of all, but second of all, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to release this hook and we're going to go ahead and tighten it down just like that. So we've got basically perpendicular to where we had it before, and now we're going to come reattach our thread, and we want to attach it right at the very base of that post. But this is going to be just like when you're starting to tie a fly. how you're going to start your thread on the shank of the hook. So I'm just going to move my way up a little bit higher on this post. I'm going to work my way back down to, you can see a glob of wax, because wax is a good thing to have right about here. Once I get back down to the bottom, I'm just going to hold that tag end out and away and take one wrap over the top of that tag end. And then come in and we're back attached to our fly. So what I'll do is I'll move my thread kind of out of the way over here. Now you can see why we tied this up so high up on the post. Because we're just going to take one wrap of our hackle, just like we would normally hackle, with touching turns, except we're moving down, we're tying around the post instead of around the shank of the hook. I'm going to take this all the way down to the base of that post. Sometimes I get greedy, and I'm trying not to. So once I've got that taken care of, I'm going to take my thread and get a couple of wraps to secure this hackle. So these wraps are going right up against the base of that post. I'm trying to keep it from capturing too many of those hackle fibers, if any at all. And then just as if my hook were standing straight up, I'm going to find out exactly where this hackle is attached so that I can clip it off nice and close. You know, something like that. I'm going to give myself a little bit of thread. We're going to whip finish and be done with the fly. The interesting thing again here is we're whip finishing on the post. We're not whip finishing on the hook itself. So I'm going to take my wraps, trying to keep it around just the base of that post, trying not to capture many, if any, of those fibers. So once you're going to finish this down, we're going to go ahead and tighten that thread up. That will allow me to access it to cut it off nice and close. At this point, we can pivot our fly back up into position and do any cleanup that we decide that we want to do. So a little bit of, a little bit of extra effort is required here, but we're left with a really nice and solid green drake, parachute in style. And so there you have it. We've got the parachute drake. Great pattern to have, especially when the drakes are coming off, the green drakes. It's got the classic dark tail. Like the parachute, it just helps me find this in the water a little bit better. But a few unconventional things in terms of repositioning your hook and things like that. But once you get comfortable doing that kind of stuff, number one, it opens up a lot of opportunities in your fly tying, just generally. But it also makes this pattern fairly easy to tie and still have it end up looking good. So grab yourself a hook, sit down in front of your vise, and get to work.